What is going on, everybody? My name is John Solo. A few weeks ago, we talked about some of the ideas for The Force Awakens that didn't make it past the cutting room floor. You guys seem to enjoy it, so I thought this week we would do the same thing with the episode that started the entire saga off, Episode 4. There are both very interesting and very ridiculous concepts that I know you guys are going to want to hear, so let's jump into it right now. Without further ado, here are 25 ideas rejected from A New Hope. George Lucas wrote many iterations of Episode 4 before turning in his final script, which would end up changing again before filming started. At its longest, the screenplay was 200 pages long, which equates to roughly a 200-minute movie. Because he had spent so much time writing the screenplay, he was against the idea of condensing it. As an alternative, he decided to focus on the first third of the script and expand on the remaining 2 parts and make 2 additional films. Most of us know by now that Lucas drew a lot of inspiration for Star Wars from Flash Gordon and Dune. The first 2 drafts of his Star Wars screenplay mirrored the property so much he was actually sued by the property holders into changing them. At one point, Lucas had actually cut Princess Leia from the script and considered making Luke a female to replace her. The concept art for a female Luke ended up being used decades later as inspiration for Rey's design. Another idea that he considered for Luke was making him a 60-year-old war veteran and naming him Starkiller. That veteran role became Obi-Wan Kenobi, and the Starkiller name was changed to Skywalker sometime after they started filming. "May the Force be with you" is one of the most iconic lines from the Star Wars saga, but did you know that this is the altered version of the original line? Back when he was writing the screenplay and Star Wars was called The Star Wars, the phrase was actually "May the Force of others be with you." No, I don't like that as much either. The Death Star battle from the end of the film contains the red and gold squadrons of X-Wings and Y-Wings, but at first, we were supposed to see the blue and gold squadrons on this mission. They were forced to change the blue-colored X-Wings to red when the blue fighters caused issues with the blue screen technique they were using. As a reference to this, Blue Squadron was used for the battle on Scarif in Rogue One. Another change to the Death Star battle was the removal of Luke's first failed trench run. Initially, they had planned on him failing at his first attempt and succeeding with the second, and even filmed him doing so before deciding to scrap the idea. In early drafts of the script, R2-D2 spoke basic English. Although I think the idea of a human voice for R2-D2 is a little weird in retrospect, what makes it weirder is that he had a crude vocabulary. They ended up replacing his dialogue with beeps and other noises, but they kept in C-3PO's reactions to what he was saying. So even though we'll never know exactly what R2 is saying, it's pretty much confirmed that he's not exactly family friendly. Speaking of family friendly, even though they thought most of R2's lines were too explicit, they actually added the words hell and damn into a couple of other characters' lines to ensure that the movie got a PG rating instead of G. A New Hope is the only movie out of the first 6 that uses profanity more than once. After deciding that Han Solo wasn't going to be a huge green-skinned monster with gills, George Lucas had planned on the character being played by an African-American actor. What's crazy about this is he initially wanted Billy D. Williams for the role. We don't know why exactly he changed this detail, but I'm glad we got to see Billy D in the sequel playing a pretty similar character. Sometime before casting Harrison Ford as Han Solo, George Lucas had actually specifically told him he wasn't allowed to audition. The reason was he was in George's very own American Graffiti and wanted new faces for Star Wars. It wasn't until he had Ford read lines with actors auditioning for other roles that he realized he would be perfect for the part. The classic scene where Chewbacca scares away a mouse droid on the Death Star was thought up on set and not scripted. One of the funnier ways that the studio executives tried to alter Star Wars was redesigning Chewbacca's costume with a pair of shorts. It turns out they weren't happy about the idea of him being naked despite being covered from head to toe in fur. Seriously. An earlier version of Chewbacca can be seen in this Cantina concept art. This specific piece doesn't show Chewbacca himself, but a few other members of his species. These guys were eventually called Hasks and can actually be seen in The Force Awakens in Maz Kanata's castle. A mistake that was left in the movie on accident but is now iconic to Star Wars fans is the stormtrooper hitting his head on the door. Obviously this wasn't scripted, but as a goof they decided to add the thud sound effect into the 1997 special edition. C-3PO's personality ended up much different than intended. First, Lucas had planned on him sounding more like a used car salesman, whatever that sounds like, but he changed it to that of a snooty British butler after hearing Anthony Daniels' performance. The TIE in TIE Fighter is an acronym and stands for Twin Ion Engines. An alternate meaning they considered was Third Intergalactic Empire. Personally, I find this very interesting because with a name like that, insinuating that this is the Third Intergalactic Empire radically changes the history of the Star Wars galaxy. So if they chose that name, the prequels might not have been so bad. The first sound effect for Darth Vader breathing was more labored and raspier before being replaced with the sound we know today. That raspier, more painful sounding version is used in episode 6 after Vader gets injured. In order to add a little more substance to the cantina scene, they had to do some reshoots that showed more of the cantina's alien clientele. Because the set for the reshoot was so small, you can see the same window used in a few different segments. One of the most criticized parts of episodes 1, 2, and 3 is the awkward, clunky dialogue. As it turns out, the original trilogy faced the same problem. Harrison Ford has been quoted saying, "You can write this shit, but you can't say it," in reference to that fact. Sometime during filming, Harrison, Mark Hamill, and Carrie Fisher approached Lucas and asked for permission to ad-lib some of the more basic lines. He was kind of insulted by that request, but to his credit, he did approve. The opening crawl we see in A New Hope is only 4 sentences long, but Lucas's first draft consisted of 6 paragraphs with 4 sentences each. When he asked his friend Brian De Palma what he thought of this draft, he said, and I quote, "George, you're out of your mind. Let me sit down and write this for you." You might remember Luke's line after putting on the Stormtrooper helmet, "I can't see a thing in this helmet." This was actually not scripted, and Mark Hamill had said it to Harrison Ford when he thought the cameras had stopped rolling, but someone behind the scenes thought it was funny and decided to put it in. The Tantive 4 from the film's iconic opening scene was the original design for the Millennium Falcon. One of the more interesting tweaks I found, the scene between Ben and Luke in Ben's home, was originally written and edited to have the dialogue in a different order. Initially, it started with Leia's message to Ben and then went to the topic of the Clone Wars. The change was made because Lucas and his editors realized that if Luke and Ben stuck around to have a conversation after Leia's message, it would seem like there was no urgency to it. They rearranged it so it happened more toward the end of the scene, right before Luke and Ben talk about leaving Tatooine. Kind of a weird one, but I thought it was pretty cool. You gotta love little stuff like that. The scene of Darth Vader's TIE fighter spinning out of control was added late in the film at the request of George Lucas. Other members of the crew were opposed to including it, feeling that it set up a sequel. At the time, sequels were generally considered to be inferior cash-in movies, but Lucas insisted and the scene made it in. And that is going to be it for today's list. What'd you think? If you enjoyed it and learned yourself a little something, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button, as it helps the channel out a whole lot and it lets me know you care. Also, make sure you subscribe for weekly content just like this and send this video to a friend who might like it. Thank you all so much for watching. My name is John Solo. May the Force be with you, and remember, John shot first.